It's all about you, and it's all about you.
Hey, welcome to WrestleReward, the show that looks at whether the wrestle was worth the reward. Clever, right? I'm Justin, and today's episode covers SmackDown Live from July 26, 2016 in Buffalo, New York from the First Niagara Center, the first SmackDown Live of WWE's new era.
You see, it's a new era in SmackDown Live.
Welcome back to SmackDown Live, a new era.
We said it's a new era!
It is definitely a new era with new blood.
New era. This is the embodiment of the new era right here on SmackDown Live.
Two representatives of the new era.
Throughout the episode, I'll be handing out some very special awards for the best and worst of the night. So let's start the show. The new era of SmackDown Live begins live with new blue microphones, new graphics, and a new management team, as well as a new intro that did, however, keep the old school SmackDown fist.
There used to be a giant fist, and I was like, man, SmackDown is really into fisting.
The ragtag roster of #SD Live surrounds the ring where Commissioner Shane McMahon and GM DB don't demand
Ruthless aggression.
but do introduce the non-Saudi Arabian crown jewel of the brand. No, it's not Colt Cabana, but rather WWE World Champion Dean Ambrose. The former member of the Shield ascended to the throne in Money in the Bank when he cashed in the briefcase he won earlier in the night on his former Shield brother Seth Rollins, who just minutes earlier had beaten their other Shield brother Roman Reigns for the gold. Ambrose's last 8 days had 30 days worth of chaos in them, with 3 different title defenses, the first of which was on the final Raw before the draft where a double pin between Rollins and Ambrose resulted in mass confusion that was eventually ruled a draw. 24 hours later on the newly live SmackDown was the draft where Raw selected Rollins #1 overall and Ambrose was taken #2 by SmackDown Live, setting the stage for a rematch where Ambrose left no doubt about it and pinned Raw's franchise player. Monday Night Raw increased its odds at taking back the title when Raw superstars Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins joined Ambrose for the Shield Triple Threat Dream Match of Battleground, but Ambrose once again came out victorious for a clean sweep of his Shield mates while keeping the title on SmackDown just as God, Paul Heyman, and Brock Lesnar intended. A 6-pack challenge was announced to determine Ambrose's SummerSlam challenger, pitting a mix of new and old against each other with John Cena, Dolph Ziggler, Baron Corbin, Bray Wyatt, AJ Styles, and a 6th man to be determined through a Battle Royal, news that Colt Cabana loves, and that match begins. The Battle Royal begins with tussling all across the ring, morphing into the field targeting the Big Red Machines of Kane and Eric Rowan in opposing corners. Simon Gotch of the Vaudevillains is dumped out first by an unrestrained Kane, though it certainly wasn't the last time we'd ever hear from him. Kane isn't done, sending his fellow red and black enthusiast Connor and Victor of the Ascension to the wasteland before going to work on Kalisto, who JBL confuses with his former Lucha Dragons partner Sin Cara. Apollo Crews and Jey Uso, 2 men actually still employed and on SmackDown 5 years later, battle in another corner, but a light breeze called Tyler catches Uso with a supermodel kick that with the assistance of Fandango eliminates Jey just 2 days after Breezango upset the former tag champs on the Battleground kickoff. Fandango and Breeze celebrate with a heart-shaped fist bump, just like the name of that Nirvana song, and we see that during the ensuing commercial break, Mojo Rawley foreshadowed his Andre Battle Royal success by clotheslining Eric Rowan over the top. And just as JBL hypes up Mojo's prospects by comparing him to other footballers turned wrestlers, Mojo gets enziguried right out of the match by Alberto Del Rio. SmackDown's 12th overall selection follows up by clotheslining Mojo's hype bros bro Zack Ryder, but Del Rio's then rotted into the ropes by Kalisto, the man who beat him for the United States title not just once but 2 different times earlier in 2016, and Apollo and Ryder gained their revenge by taking ADR OUT. Not far behind are Breezango at the hands of Kane, so Fandango probably wasn't as excited to see Kane in this Battle Royal as he was for WrestleMania 34's. That leaves us with a grab bag Final 4 of Kane, Apollo Crews, Zack Ryder, and Kalisto, with Kane trying to avenge being left out of the 1997 Final 4 for the world title despite being in the Final 4 of the Rumble that Vader wasn't. Ryder strikes by catching Kane on a flying dropkick off the middle rope, where unlike 2012, Ryder actually did mean to go flying through the air this time. Ryder goes for a ground level dropkick on the other masked man and completely whiffs, a spot so bad that he instantly becomes public enemy #1 over the 7-foot monster. Ryder fights out and catches Kalisto on a neckbreaker and throws him over the top rope, but Kalisto lands on the apron and Apollo comes in to clothesline Zack over the top, also landing him on the apron. Kalisto dicks down Apollo off the springboard and Ryder goes for a Macho Man elbow, but his terrible no good very bad night continues by slipping off the top rope. Ryder's balance isn't helped any by Kalisto adding a super kick that connects unlike Ryder's dropkick, as does the Rana directly into the mat. Perspective is a hell of a thing since Kane and Kalisto face off and look to be the same size, but Kalisto's short frame gives him a long fall out of Kane's goozle. Ryder catches Kane in the big red shin and then in the big red face with the broski boot and sets up for a rough Ryder leg lariat by way of Long Island, but Ryder's momentum is halted by Kane for the second time in 5 years and Zack is subtracted from this equation. Kane goozles Apollo and looks to finish this match on a hot streak, but Apollo backflips out of the chokeslam and refuses to bend a knee by instead bending the rope for the shocking win over the man who held the record for most eliminations in a single Rumble for over a decade. Apollo Crews celebrates his victory as I lament not being able to make a snarky comment about SmackDown being the land of opportunity since Kane actually did lose to the young guy, who makes former Raw guest host Carl Edwards proud with a celebratory backflip. After the match, we get the news that former SmackDown standout of Team Angle, Shelton Benjamin, will return to WWE for the first time since 2010, though we'd soon find out the word soon has a very loose definition. After sponsoring the women's title match on Raw, Mountain Dew continues its commitment to women's empowerment by making possible a return bout from Battleground with Natalya facing SmackDown's top female draft pick, Becky Lynch. Natalya failed in back-to-back pay-per-view matches to take the women's title from Charlotte Flair, getting outnumbered 3-on-2 at Payback when Little Nate's Charles Robinson called for the bell with Natalya in the sharpshooter as Bret Hart looked on from ringside. And then 3-on-1 at Extreme Rules when Ric Flair replaced Charles with Dana Brooke to help Charlotte retain her title. Charlotte kicked her dad to the curb for the first of what feels like 10 times, telling him he was dead to her, ironic considering what Flair told Natalya just a month earlier.
Kill yourself! You're out of your mind!
Dana joined in on Charlotte's fun by getting a win over Natalya on Memorial Day thanks to the numbers game, but Charlotte's former PCB partner Becky Lynch interrupted a post-match beatdown to even the odds. The two sides met in a tag match at Money in the Bank where Dana used Becky as a weapon against Natalya to help Charlotte secure her third straight pay-per-view victory over Natty, and for Natalya it was 3 strikes and Becky was out with Lynch getting attacked in frustration. Becky acknowledged her Sting-like track record of friendship with Charlotte, Paige, and now Natalya all having turned their backs on her, a point driven home when Natalya used her front to attack Becky from behind in the middle of her interview. Natalya looked to her family history for inspiration and saying enough was enough and it's time for a change. But Becky wanted some fresh material, so she skipped her match with Summer Rae to pounce on Natalya at ringside. The two would continue brawling over the next several weeks, including on draft night where Becky was drafted 14th overall, going in round 3 as SmackDown's first woman and just the 3rd woman overall behind women's champion Charlotte and Sasha Banks. Natalya snuck into the last televised portion of picks, also going to SmackDown as a 6th round selection in the $1 tier of rounds, with the 3 aforementioned women as well as the rookie Nia Jax from NXT going before her. Perhaps fueled by that disrespect, she made Becky Lynch tap out at Battleground, and though it is a new era, the rematches and Natalya herself remain constants. Natalya enters her match with cat ears on before we also see a cat in the crowd to greet her, and then the match begins with Natalya handstanding over a dropdown and getting taken down with a single leg dropkick. Natalya tries for a German suplex, but the Irish lass holds onto the ropes to clothesline the Canadian out of a handstand kip-up. Becky lights up Natty with a leg lariat, but that leg pays when Natalya rips it out from underneath Becky off the middle rope. Natalya stretches the abdo-women of Becky, who manages to hip toss her way free and then use her legs again for an enziguri, but those 2 bursts of offense only earn a count of 2. Natalya catches Becky into sharpshooter position, which Becky kicks out of, but Natty gets her on the next go-around by connecting on that German suplex that failed earlier. Becky uses her legs to kick again, this time out of a pinfall, and then stops the discus clothesline to seemingly go for a cover that she ends herself, but it becomes clear why when she transitions into the disarmor. Natalya transitions out of that herself by flattening Becky, who then gets dropped with that elusive discus clothesline for another 2 count. After scoring the German suplex and the clothesline in her second attempts, Natalya goes back to trying for the sharpshooter to finish the match off, but Becky disarms her out of that hold into the disarmor that the submission specialist is forced to tap out to. Talking Smack host Renee Young interviews Becky Lynch after the match, who starts her Becky Balboa phase, but she's soon cut off by the debuting Alexa Bliss. Selected 47th overall in the draft from NXT, Alexa arrives with a truly bewildering line.
And SmackDown Live is getting ready to get a Blitztation.
One that nobody on Earth seemed to know the meaning of after a search through Twitter and Instagram for clues. Number 39 overall Naomi is out next to stake her claim to SmackDown superiority, inciting Tori Vega by promising to make it shine. Not to be left out, the Miss Irrelevant of the 2016 draft, Carmella, who was the final star chosen and also called up from NXT at number 59 overall, declared she was no Addie Singer because day after day she's going to make SmackDown feel fabulous. Suddenly, the blissfully fabulous straight fire glow of SmackDown's women's division gets bathed in red for the arrival of the woman with a fantastic new intro.
Allow yourself to be seduced, enchanted, dazzled, and entranced by all red everything herself, Eva Marie!
And the master of the air guitar blows an air kiss to her new competition. It's a staple of 2010 SmackDown, an all-new edition of the most must-see show in WWE history. Welcome to MizTV. Maryse introduces us to the sexiest of the sexy. That's right, her husband and Intercontinental Champion, The Miz. Maryse may be humble, but I'll celebrate her by giving out the Golden Turtleneck Award for Best Fit of the Night to the former Divas Champion, who pretty much has a Lifetime Achievement Award in this category by virtue of, well, being Maryse. Back to The Miz, who introduces his legendary guest for this historic night, himself. It's news that JBL loves, a stark contrast from SmackDown's old era.
Miz, I hate you. I hope your Christmas is terrible.
Miz and Mrs. display their affection to prove that love is real, but they're cut off by the white wrist tape variant of Randy Orton, making his first appearance on SmackDown since October 8th, 2015, which has an absurd amount of views on YouTube. Orton was planned for a Hell in a Cell kickoff tag match with Dean Ambrose against the Wyatt family, but a dislocated shoulder saved Randy from jerking the curtain and put him off TV until Battleground 2 nights prior, where he hit up his first talk show of this car wash cycle by appearing on the highlight reel with Raw's Chris Jericho. Orton arrived as the 9th overall selection in the draft, going in the same round as his fellow OVW prodigies John Cena and Brock Lesnar, the latter of whom was Orton's SummerSlam opponent. Randy's highlight reel appearance was highlighted by a jab at Lesnar over a failed drug test that overturned his UFC 200 victory from 2 weeks earlier, and I'm pretty sure someone told Brock about it. Orton chose violence in his return and cut film on the highlight reel by ending it the same way that pretty much every match between Orton and Jericho ever ended. Back to SmackDown, where to make a long story short, we get more of the Orton stand-up hour, which leads to him suggesting that he return to the ring right here in Buffalo, New York, against his old friend, The Miz. The brazenness, the audacity, the temerity of Orton causes Miz to bring up old stuff, specifically that Miz won his first WWE World title 6 years earlier by cashing in Money in the Bank on Orton. Randy feels the paper cut from that receipt and responds by suggesting that Miz is getting pegged by Maryse on the regular.
Wow! Just wow!
Maryse accepts the match on Miz's behalf, and after a commercial break and nice overhead shot, the match begins with Miz calling a quick timeout to consult with his former Divas champion wife Maryse while his fan maximizes his minutes on screen. It seems to pay off for The Miz when he returns inside and catches Orton in the midsection before depositing him over the middle rope to the floor where the Apex Predator becomes the hunted. The Marine stomps a mud hole and walks it dry on Orton's surgically repaired shoulder and then runs it into the barricade for extra damage points. Orton takes his own time out to nurse the shoulder at ringside, but once again gets a taste of his own Viper medicine into the steel stairs. Miz throws Orton again, but this time just into the ring to set up a victory, but instead he walks right into an RKO out of nowhere that sends Maryse into a frozen terror. The crowd is on fire for the return of the RKO, but instead of pinning Miz, Orton just sits across from him, staring for some reason, as the crowd goes quiet, which seems like the opposite effect you should desire as a pro wrestler. The ex-Marine eventually rises to toy with his spray and administer a second dose of RKO to the MIZ with a fantastically placed RKO out of nowhere sign in the background. Randy listens to the crowd this time and scores the most unrare victory in all of WWE, a non-title win over the Intercontinental Champion, and Mauro shoehorns in a second pop culture reference of the night that means absolutely nothing to anyone not watching the day this aired, and even then that was a stretch, earning him this show's Art Donovan Award for Worst Commentary of the night.
How much does this guy weigh? Hey, 600 pounds there, Art. Huh? 600 pounds plus.
Randy Orton ended up treating The Miz like White Sox ace Chris Sale treated his team's throwback jerseys. These two go at it like the Chloes, Kardashian and Grace Moretz. It's Natalya with an abdominal stretch. Becky Lynch looking as impressive as the Wonder Woman movie trailer at Comic-Con.
We see our Sign of the Times Award winner, another Lifetime Achievement honoree with the ICP Hatchet Man appearing, and then we see a random man warming up in the ring for a match we'll never see because the one-man band Heath Slater jumps the rail to whack that young man like he was a tambourine. It's possible that Heath Slater was perturbed over being the only healthy member of the active roster not selected in the 2016 draft, though when you look at the others who weren't picked, it's really almost kind of an honor. Heath wasn't having it though and went from undrafted to wanting the whole enchilada by giving the Hardcore Holly pitch of putting himself in the main event so he can beat everyone. The crowd seems more open to that idea than one fan is to then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, with Heath dancing to the chants of his name like a true rock star. Out comes Commissioner Shane McMahon to suggest that Heath simply send in his resume, though we saw how that worked out for Billy Kay, so I don't blame Slater for instead listing his career accomplishments at the same time he works in a plug for WWE Network, an accomplishment worthy of a contract on its own. Heath declares himself NXT's favorite term, the hottest free agent in sports entertainment today, and Shane seemingly comes around to agree until we go back to the ring and find out NXT's Rhino is the free agent in question, wiping out Heath and celebrating his alliance leader bringing him back to WWE while Mauro's able to sneak a sly TNA reference and hyping up the Man-Beast. It's now time for our main event for an opportunity at the WWE World Championship at SummerSlam with Dolph Ziggler, Bray Wyatt, Baron Corbin, Apollo Crews, John Cena, and AJ Styles throwing down on SmackDown. This wasn't new territory for Cena and Styles, having been at war the better part of the last 2 months after Styles spoiled Cena's Memorial Day return by partially reforming Bullet Club with Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson when Cena refused to give his shirt to the woman who specifically asked him to. They lived by the mantra #BeatUpJohnCena and lived up to the hashtag when Gallows and Anderson helped AJ steal the victory in the first time ever dream match between Cena and Styles at Money in the Bank. Cena enlisted backup in the form of Enzo and Cass who helped even the odds and the score, allowing Cena to topple Styles in a 6-man tag at Battleground. Another pair in this match with history was Corbin and Ziggler, with Corbin storming onto the scene at WrestleMania 32 and winning the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal Extravaganza Spectacular, last throwing out Kane to win as Apollo did earlier on SmackDown and outlasting such names as DDP, Big Show, Shaquille O'Neal, and for some reason, Tatanka. Corbin's singles debut the next night wasn't quite as hot, fighting Ziggler to a double countout, though he did end Dolph's day on the floor. Corbin suffered his first loss on the main roster at Payback to Dolph, but a match happening on the kickoff is sort of a if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it scenario. Corbin avenged that loss by winning their next 2 pay-per-view matches because the world demanded that many more, and though he also won an amateur wrestling contest against the Kent State Hall of Famer, the physical toll of that win made it feel closer to a loss. Bray Wyatt and Apollo Crews, meanwhile, had no recent connection to anyone in this match, and Wyatt had just returned from injury, but Apollo did beat former world champion Sheamus at Money in the Bank, so hey, that's something. The six-pack challenge was cracked open with Wyatt going after former enemy John Cena while AJ targeted Apollo and Corbin and Ziggler continued fighting forever. Styles and Wyatt eventually isolate Apollo as they try to one-up each other with offensive moves and Wyatt takes a bow for his work, the exact same bit used on Raw the night prior between Kevin Owens and Rusev, which also included Owens taking a bow and a running senton being used. Styles again goes to one-up Wyatt but eats a brutal lariat from the Eater of Worlds before Bray gets caught with a dropkick from Ziggler, making his feet a liability that Corbin tries to stop, but all he gets for his troubles is a knee to the mouth from Styles. AJ keeps things moving with a springboard 450 to Wyatt, definitely one-upping him, but avid TNA Impact viewer John Cena knows that move has won matches for AJ before and breaks the cover. Styles makes Hiroki Goto proud with an Ushigoroshi on Cena, but Apollo didn't forget being the sacrificial lamb and gives Styles more TNA flashbacks by using the Kurt Angle Germans to turn AJ inside out. Baron Corbin rushes in to choke trip Apollo and go for a cover that earns a 2, but more importantly reminded me of the best moment of Corbin's career.
You should have stayed in Ring of Honor. You should have stayed in Little Jim's at home with your parents.
We get the rare double Towers of Doom to make that spot feel slightly less cliche, though what Cena is feeling may be a shattered inside based on his facial expression. Corbin nails a super sweet deep 6 to Apollo, who headstands his way out of the cover to keep the match and his dreams alive. Apollo soon catches Corbin though with his patented powerbomb, but Bray rips the Donut King John Cone out of the ring so he can show off his fancy crab walk to the blur that is Apollo falling backwards in fear. Bray comes back inside to add his sister Abigail, but Dolph returns to add a zigzag that might have won the match, but John Cone realizes the zigzag never actually ends matches anymore, so he takes his time recovering on the outside. Ziggler lines up for a super kick, but instead the Superman of WWE swoops into AA the man who stole AJ Lee from him, breaking 160 million hearts in the process. Wyatt recovers and locks Cena in for a reunion with Sister Abigail, but Cena uses his strength to push Bray into a Pele kick and turns that opening into an AA that Styles shocks Cena by straight up kicking out of. Apollo dives into Cena, who rolls through the crossbody, collecting himself while also collecting Apollo to connect on another AA, followed by one more to Bray Wyatt and Sister Abigail. Corbin refuses to fall in line and elbows his way out of his AA, but in a familiar sight, John Cena ducks a clothesline and that leads to an attitude adjustment on the Lonely Wolf. Out of nowhere comes AJ launching himself into frame for a phenomenal forearm, but Cena rolls out of the ring before Styles can make the cover. AJ instead turns into the super kick that won Dolph the world title, which in this case wins him the #1 contenders match for the world title as Ziggler scores the huge upset to cap off this new era night. This match pretty easily wins the Brockberg for best match of the night, with fun action from all 6 throughout and a unique pairing of names highlighting the past, present, and future of the surprise winner as well. Dolph celebrates with his public, since crowds actually still had hope for his career at this point, and world champion Dean Ambrose re-emerges to show off to the show-off that having the belt makes him taller than Ziggler. We then get a replay for the finish of the match ahead of returning to a live shot where GM Daniel Bryan is now celebrating the SummerSlam matchup. And that's followed by Commissioner Shane McMahon coming out to do the same. And then yet another replay of the finish because I assume they timed out SmackDown to have room to spare at the end in case they accidentally went long on the traditionally pre-taped show. We return live with Bryan hyping up the crowd to keep the reaction going with about 40 seconds left until finally the trademark graphic appears and we're allowed to fade to black on SmackDown Live. Monday Night Raw definitely took home the prize for superior relaunch show on this week, but like an Atlanta Falcons win probability chart, the trends would soon drastically shift. Raw's new centerpiece Finn Balor went down to injuries in the same match that he became the first ever Universal Champion, sidelining him for 7 months and beginning the Universal title curse that seemed to follow that belt up until current SmackDown centerpiece Roman Reigns in his year-plus reign. Led by Roman's Shield brother Dean Ambrose with his own world title reign, SmackDown Live's whole became greater than the sum of its parts, even besting Raw in the ratings at the height of SmackDown's glory run in December 2016 before it moved to Fox and that became commonplace. Ambrose wasn't the champion on that night though, instead it was AJ Styles who did the unthinkable at SmackDown Live's first pay-per-view Backlash and became WWE World Champion, a reality previously only thought possible in video games. It followed AJ's monumental and clean-as-a-sheet victory over WWE's Babe Ruth John Cena at SummerSlam, the same night that Ambrose retained the world title over Dolph Ziggler in a less-than-spectacular SummerSlam clash. Styles and Ambrose would both go on to become Grand Slam champions over the next few years, with Styles the fastest in WWE history to do so. Ambrose's trajectory in WWE was coming crashing down though, going from world champion in pay-per-view main events to Intercontinental champion headlining WrestleMania 33's kickoff show, a match I'm positive was bumped from the main card after a disaster of a Talking Smack segment.
That's rich, listen to you talk. That's rich. Why don't you just shut up? You shut up. Don't tell me to shut up. You shut up. I told you first, you shut up. Well,
Ambrose had various Shield reunions over the next 4 years and also transformed into the dream body of Rich Evans.
Oh my god!
But a long-awaited heel turn didn't materialize like anyone had hoped. After a now famous vignette where he was years ahead of the curve on promoting the importance of getting your shots, Ambrose had enough and walked away from WWE after one last not-so-well-paying mission with the Shield, though he's since found new revenue streams. John Cena claimed his record-tying 16th world title from AJ Styles in a classic at the 2017 Royal Rumble, but Cena's 16th reign only lasted 14 days, coming to an end inside the Elimination Chamber at the hands of longtime rival Bray Wyatt, who now officially had the whole world in his hands. That came after the newest member of the Wyatt family, Randy Orton of all people, won his second Royal Rumble match to earn a shot at Wyatt's WWE title. And that Royal Rumble win came a month after Orton, Wyatt, and the returning Luke Harper collectively won the SmackDown Tag Team title at TLC, Wyatt's first championship in WWE. With that loyalty in mind and Orton now Bray's only remaining follower, Orton seemingly forfeited his WrestleMania match against Wyatt, but what Bray thought was world domination came burning down one March night in 2017. As great as the visual was, the moment is largely considered to be the beginning of the end for the original SmackDown Live's hot streak, and if it wasn't, then excluding Luke Harper from the world title match at WrestleMania in favor of a projector with pictures of bugs and maggots as well as a sperm during Orton's entrance certainly was. The two would find their way back to each other 3 years later on Raw, this time introducing Wyatt's alter ego The Fiend and his new Fiendess Alexa Bliss into the mix, also climaxing with a WrestleMania match in Florida. Despite surviving being set on fire at the same pay-per-view where they once came together to win Tag Team Gold, Wyatt getting betrayed by another he believed to be his follower cost him yet another Mania match against Orton. The consequences of this loss to Orton were even worse than a feud in tag team with Woken Matt Hardy, because after already seeing Eric Rowan and Braun Strowman released by WWE, Wyatt also found himself fired after his latest WrestleMania debacle.
We still have each other. We will always have each other.
Another former Wyatt family member, Daniel Bryan, was forced to sit and watch others do what he loved while SmackDown Live GM, and though he was critically acclaimed at the job, he had decided if he wasn't cleared by WWE before his contract expired, he would leave to resume his in-ring career. Bryan bucked the odds once more in early 2018 and got cleared by WWE's Army of Doctors, returning to the ring alongside his SmackDown management partner Shane McMahon at WrestleMania in the same stadium where he won the world title 4 years earlier in front of Kevin Owens. And as fate would have it, that return match was against Owens and Sami Zayn, trying to avenge the noises they forced out of Shane's body. Bryan went on to finally reclaim what he never lost and reign atop both SmackDown and the entire planet as its re-sustainable champion alongside his former Wyatt family brother and WWE's original sommelier Eric Rowan, culminating in Bryan giving Kofi Kingston his own Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30 moment. Bryan returned to the WrestleMania main event, going after the Universal title and falling to a SmackDown stackdown alongside Edge to Roman Reigns, who Bryan would challenge once more and put his SmackDown career on the line against in doing so, a sharp turn from how Bryan had long felt about the Universal title.
We don't want to be like Raw and just all of a sudden, day after, like, oh, we don't have a world title, so we're going to call it a Universal title, a Galaxy title. These guys are going to be the Milky Way Tag Team Champions.
I don't want to be going for the championship of the universe. Do you know how silly that is? I don't want to be champion of the universe.
Bryan fell to the longtime thorn in his side and decided to see through the alternate timeline where he left in 2018, now trying his hand at winning a different world championship. Meanwhile, Shane McMahon had become elite in his own right, subbing for an injured Miz in the finals of 2018's World Cup tournament to become the undisputed best in the world. The Miz saw more gold in Shane's future, convincing the man who teamed alongside Daniel Bryan for 2 years to team up with the man whose career-defining moment was ripping his former NXT rookie Daniel Bryan to shreds on Talking Smack. The two joined forces and became one of the most unlikely tag team champions in recent memory, but it didn't last long because they lost the gold to the Usos, who since the flatline first half of 2016 were resurrected on SmackDown Live to become one of the hottest teams in the world, being the best tag team in the world for their 6th tag title. That caused Shane to turn on Miz and set up a WrestleMania clash where the owner's son made the Miz's father world famous. Shane's abuse of power continued through 2019, even beating his father's favorite son, but the one man who knew how to stop him re-emerged when Kevin Owens rekindled the rivalry in a loser leaves WWE ladder match to force Shane out of wrestling for about a year until he returned with an underground fight club and got another WrestleMania payday. Every woman from the SmackDown Live roster got a Mania payday at WrestleMania 33, with SmackDown's favorite match type, the Six-Pack Challenge, determining its women's champion just as it did at Backlash when Becky Lynch became the first SmackDown Women's Champion. SmackDown's women's division was a key factor in its success, with Becky becoming the first champion and going on to become a five-time champion as of recording, as well as the winner of WrestleMania's first ever women's main event. The second SD Live champion was Alexa Bliss, starting a meteoric rise and becoming the first 2-time SmackDown Women's Champion. Alexa also went on to become the second women's Money in the Bank winner, which also came at the expense of Becky Lynch, the first women's Elimination Chamber winner, a 2-time women's tag team champion, and the first to hold the SmackDown and Raw women's titles, the latter of which she's won 3 times while becoming one of the most prolific merch movers in WWE, no matter how odd the merchandise. Naomi was third in line, besting Bliss for the belt first at Elimination Chamber 2017 and then again at WrestleMania 33 in her hometown of Orlando after returning from an injury suffered in the Chamber win that caused her to forfeit the title. Naomi's career was revitalized on SmackDown Live, much like her brother-in-law Jay and husband Jimmy Uso's have been, even adding her own glow to the championship during a much too short-lived reign due to Natalya having her day in the sun after a near 7-year gap between title reigns. After losing that title, it would be another 4 years until Natalya held gold on SmackDown again, helping 2017 SmackDown acquisition and fellow second-generation star Tamina win her first non-24/7 title of her 12-year WWE career. Natalya's pre-draft rival Charlotte Flair arrived on SmackDown in 2017 to take the title from her, but the blue and gold would transfer to another second-generation star when Carmella became the first woman to ever cash in Money in the Bank in April 2018 and return the title to a SmackDown original. And as of September 2021, the final pick from the 2016 draft is the only wrestler still in WWE to have never left SmackDown for another brand. Believe it or not, but rumors suggest that Eva Marie was earmarked to usher in the SmackDown Women's title, but a pre-SummerSlam suspension wound up sidelining her from WWE until a triumphant return in 2021 where she finally got that SummerSlam match, this time against one of the women she was set to team with in 2016, Alexa Bliss. The woman who stepped into Eva's spot at 2016 SummerSlam was Nikki Bella, returning from neck surgery and going on arguably the best run of her career ahead of a WrestleMania 33 tag match with boyfriend John Cena against Maryse and her husband The Miz. Though at times it was hard to decipher who the real John and Nikki were.
I propose you stop breaking rule number 11 of John Cena's house rules and take your feet off the furniture.
There was no doubt who came out victorious at WrestleMania when Cena and Nikki won the match and ended the night with a marriage proposal. And to be clear, the winners were Miz and Maryse because they're married with 2 kids in a reality show while Nikki and Cena broke up a year later and Total Bellas was cancelled. Shelton X Benjamin's return wasn't cancelled but substantially delayed, not occurring until over a year later when his contract was retained by SmackDown in exchange for sending new Raw GM Kurt Angle's illegitimate son Jason Jordan to him, breaking up American Alpha but forming a new team with Chad Gable and Shelton Benjamin. The duo never won tag gold together, though would both do so with different partners in between limited single success, Gable with Bobby Roode and matching robes to close out 2018, and then Shelton with Cedric Alexander and matching suits to close out 2019 as part of the main event stable, The Hurt Business. Dolph Ziggler is another veteran from this roster who's notched multiple tag title reigns since 2016, perhaps inspired by seeing his former World Tag Team title partners the Spirit Squad during his acclaimed feud with The Miz over the IC title that saw Dolph regain the Workhorse title, but quickly lose it back to another man no stranger to makeshift tag teams. Dolph enlisted Drew McIntyre to claim Raw's tag title in 2017 and then again in 2019 with Bobby Roode, success they'd replicate with the SmackDown tags in 2021. Prior to that, the Dirty Dogs were aligned with Dolph's old rival Baron Corbin, who went from a lone wolf to a constable we thank God for.
Thank God for the constable.
To an Applebee's server retiring Kurt Angle to King of the Ring ruling over his SmackDown kingdom, though the meals weren't always of a royal or Applebee's quality. Corbin eventually lost his jesters, his crown, and then his fortune, but luckily for Corbin what happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas and he was able to bring his newfound riches back home, assuring he'll never have to go without a can opener again.
I didn't have a can opener, so I just banged the can on the sidewalk until it opened, and then I had some, but I spilled it.
Another rich man from this roster is Apollo Crews, who languished in mid-card mediocrity for much of the next 3 years before being traded from SmackDown to Raw to help out a pandemic-plagued roster with a near 30-minute match against Aleister Black. Apollo lost the match, but his fortune skyrocketed, first by winning the US title in May and then by revealing in 2021 that he was a Nigerian prince, now boasting his own commander in a 4-month reign as Intercontinental Champion, poetically extended by Aleister Black's assistance in Black's final WWE appearance. Not everyone from the SmackDown Live roster was as lucky though, because despite show-stealing Fashion Files segments throughout 2017, Breezango's in-ring success was limited to a brief NXT tag title reign in 2020 before being released a year later. Breezango's partners in crime from the Fashion Files, The Ascension, went from longest reigning NXT tag champs during the division's worst period in 2014 to Job Squad All-Stars most of their main roster run, which came to an end after 5 years in 2019. Kalisto ended the Ascension's record reign as NXT Tag Team Champions, but his 3-year Lucha House Party also ended by release in 2021, around the same time Mojo Rawley's broken mirror bad luck finally caught up to him and his hype train was derailed. Mojo's Hype Bros bro Zack Ryder saw a seemingly WWE lifer career come to a close in 2020, turning him into the most unlikely indie darling and deathmatch king, even reuniting him with his 2016 compadre Dean Ambrose as part of a run so impressive that everyone's taken notice.
Well, I took the picture of me as Vince, I put it next to a picture of Vince as the ECW champion. I texted Vince, I said, 2 legends. And he wrote, OMG.
That was it? That was the end of the conversation?
That was it.
Another name from the Battle Royal on this episode of SmackDown who found himself eliminated by WWE was Alberto Del Rio, who in August 2016 requested his release following a wellness violation and general discontent after a less than stellar second run with the company. Also opting out of the WWE experience was Simon Gotch, whose Vaudevillains team never quite found its footing on the main roster, something we should have expected when their post-Mania debut was slotted on SmackDown instead of Raw, and an incident with Sin Cara and a Coke can seemed to be when things fully went downhill. Gotch's partner, Aiden English, went on to form a new tag team with Rusev that also never won the SmackDown tag title, and he even tried his hand at filmmaking before settling into a role as color commentator on 205 Live before he and almost everyone else on that brand was released. Mauro Ranallo was the original voice of 205 Live in addition to SmackDown in 2016, but his biggest critic was either sitting beside him or in his ear depending on which story you believe, and I tend to assume the latter since Tom Phillips was added for an awkward four-man booth that primarily used Tom to introduce segments and put added pressure on Mauro, who would bow out from main roster duties shortly before WrestleMania 33. Ranallo returned as part of Triple H's NXT a few months later, but left WWE altogether in 2020, ironically as Tom Phillips was brought on to assist during the pandemic, and just a year before Tom himself fell out of favor from the man in his magic headphones and was cut loose after a demotion from Raw to Mauro's former seat on 205 Live. David Otunga's fast track to commentary worked out about as well as his fast track to being a wrestler, never developing a real personality or chemistry on SmackDown Live, which seemed to be the cause of trading him to Raw in April where he was replaced before he ever debuted by Booker T, forever making us wonder just what did Rikishi tell him about the Usos. I hope you enjoyed this episode of WrestleReward. Follow me on Twitter at Justin_S of OK, and remember to like, subscribe, comment, tweet, email, Instagram, ProBoards, WhatsApp, AOL Instant Message, and everything else this video. See you next time.
I'm the last one here. Oh, well, look at this. Isn't this just great?
How could I forget about Heath Slater, who went on the ultimate roller coaster ride, even wilder than the one on WrestleMania 33 stage. After going undrafted and being dropped by Rhino on SmackDown and then Brock Lesnar and even his former three-man bandmate Jinder Mahal on Raw, Heath eventually earned a shot in the tournament to decide SmackDown's first tag team champions. Well, sort of. Heath found an unlikely ally for the tournament ahead of facing an even more unlikely set of first-round opponents, the Headbangers. Heath and Rhino won that match and followed up with an encore performance against the Hype Bros in the semi-finals, rolling into Backlash full of cheesy crackers and hope for an above-ground pool, both of which they could now swim in because Beauty and the Man-Beast upset the dynastic Uso brothers to become tag team champions, earning a contract for Heath at long last. The reign lasted nearly 90 days, ending when Bray Wyatt won the gold for his children Randy Orton and Luke Harper, and sadly there's not a lot to show from the rest of either's WWE tenure. Rhino turned down a new contract worth double the money of his prior one in 2019 to find greener pastures, even making some history when he returned to Impact Wrestling under a mask at Slammiversary while still technically a WWE contracted wrestler for another week. Heath found himself back in the unemployment line in 2020, this time legitimately, and that 90-day number would come into play again when Slater returned to Raw during his 90-day no-compete period to confront his former 3MB mate and WWE World Champion Drew McIntyre for not being there like Slater was for Drew and Jinder when they were fired in 2014. The 2MB would make up and send out Slater on a happy nose as the stable specialist turned down a new WWE deal to spread his wings and join Rhino and Impact, proving that while the letters may change, the bond between these two cheesy crackers can't be broken.
It worked.